Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Of course, during this last week, we had that cold front move its way through. During the later part of last weekend, we did touch off some thunderstorm activity across southern Nebraska. In fact, enough precipitation fell in most locations for the drought monitor authors to eliminate the vast majority of the abnormal dryness conditions that were depicted in southern Nebraska. There are some isolated pockets where we are in the county to county and a half wide area where we do still have that dry signal, but it's too small of a scale for the drought monitor authors to depict on a national basis. Another area that we are paying a particular attention to is the northern panhandle and the northwestern corner of the Sandhills, where we started to see a dryness pattern materialize over the last 2 to 3 weeks, and we further anticipate that if the dry conditions continue, this will be an area that is right now under the gun for upgrade to abnormally dry conditions, either in next week's edition or the following week's edition of the drought monitor. So, do we have the chance for precipitation? Well, let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we have in store. Here's that ridge over the southwest, and it's still encroaching into Nebraska, so very warm conditions are expected for today. You'll notice there's a trough in the Pacific Northwest that will begin to slide toward the northern plains and start to flatten this ridge out as we go through the next 24-hour period. So as we get into tomorrow, we'll start to see this ridge buckling back toward the southwest, and some of that energy starting to move into the Dakotas. Right now, the models are indicating that the surface front will start to make its way through the state during the late afternoon hours of tomorrow afternoon, and then that will progress through the state as we go into the early morning hours of Monday. So we might see some thunderstorm development across the northwestern portion of the state tomorrow afternoon, more of that carrying through central Nebraska during the overnight hours, and as we get into Monday, we'll see that the ridge basically holds up right along the northern periphery of Nebraska. Some of that cool air will filter in and generate thunderstorm activity as the surface front hangs up somewhere across southern Nebraska. So we'll have that continuous chances of precipitation. In the western part of the state, the ridge will start to try to push back in, and so most of the moisture should remain in the eastern half of the state. And as we get into Tuesday, you notice the ridge starts to bubble up again as another system comes into the Pacific Northwest. So instead of a cooling trend as the model's been depicted in the last few days, it does look like they're shifting back to a warmer pattern starting to develop on Tuesday as that ridge takes place, and most of the moisture will just basically skirt the state of Nebraska. We might see some early morning showers in the eastern part of the state, but overall a drier pattern starts to materialize. And as we get into Wednesday, we'll notice the ridge temporarily builds in, but you'll notice that this trough comes into the western United States. So we're going to start to see some moisture pooling across the western high plains, so thunderstorm development may occur isolated in the western part of the state. In the eastern part of the state will stay warm, very warm in fact. And as we get into Thursday, now the trough starts to make its way in, and we'll start to see general thunderstorm activity across the western half of the state, progressing into the eastern half of the state as we get into Friday, as this trough starts to move toward the Great Lakes region. So if we look at the temperature forecast, we're looking at up and down motion in terms of temperatures for western Nebraska, primarily starting to cool down in the early part of the week, warms up midweek, and then we start to see thunderstorm activity increase in intensity. 8 to 14-day forecast indicates another shot of cool air with that trough moving through, and as we look in the precipitation, very wet conditions for basically the eastern half of the country.